who's selling, essential oils online. If you just kind of subversively add in these resources about how these things are actually not true, I think that people respond to that better. And always have conversations. If someone has questions, be respectful. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer and look for sources. It should really just be an open, honest discussion above all.
Okay. So how does the average person, because with the internet, there's so much stuff out there. How can we tell if something, is there some giveaways to tell us whether something is real or if it's junk science or pseudoscience? I mean, is there certain things?
I would say more than anything, if it sounds really easy or if it sounds finite, it's not usually true. For example, last week, an article came out about how this study was done, and now we know that the cause of Crohn's disease. That's almost inevitably bullshit. I looked at the study, and it actually said something like people with Crohn's disease have higher levels of E. coli and candida fungus in their guts. And the articles written by science journalists implied that that's the cause of Crohn's, but more realistically, because the disease is complicated, and most diseases are really complicated, if we haven't found a cure for them, it's probably because they're complicated. It's more likely that the cause of Crohn's made the gut more livable for those sorts of infections, and that kind of exacerbates symptoms. Anything that sounds really easy or obvious is probably bullshit. Most supplements, for example, vitamin C or turmeric, if someone says that eating it will cure a disease, probably bullshit. The best advice I can give you is eat a balanced diet where you balance starches, proteins, and vegetable matter, fats. It has to be something that you tailor for yourself, and it's never easy, and it's never don't eat anything that a third grader can't pronounce. There's never ever nothing like that is ever good advice.
Okay.
Everything is more nuanced. It's really hard to have a steadfast rule because everything is complicated. The more you look into it, the more complicated it gets. And I think that if in doubt, ask your doctor.
Okay.
They're probably a better source than I am anyway, because I study in mice.
Oh, I just have to throw out some of the specific claims. What are some of the funniest ones that you've seen? Because I think some of my funniest ones have been like the foot detox. Have you seen that?
Oh, God, the foot detox. Yeah, where you put your feet in a water bath and the bath turns black and therefore you're detoxing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That's anything where you put something up your butt is pretty funny to me. I mean,
everything but MMS. That's the one thing that I don't think is funny.
That's not so fun. It's funny that someone would think that would work, but it's tragic that they inflict it on children and people who are less capable of critical thinking or thinking for themselves or, self-autonomy. I hate that parents can do experimental and cruel procedures on children in general. But the way people raise their kids is always a frustrating point for me. I don't have children, but if I see someone yelling at their kid, instead of being patient, I get frustrated. Or if I hear about someone putting bleach up their kid's butt, I get really frustrated and angry. And
I was about to throw in that the MMS for people that may not be familiar with that is a very close. I would say it's probably the twin sister of concentrated bleach. So what those MMS cures are supposed to do is it's supposed to cure a bunch of diseases, including they've put it for everything from malaria to autism. So a lot of parents that are desperate to find a way to help their autistic children are actually basically using concentrated bleach as an enema for their children.
The pictures of that, people will say, oh, my kid passed this parasite, and they'll take pictures of their stool. And in these pictures, you can see the mucosal lining of their kid's guts that has just shed because bleach just killed it. And I know what that is when I see it. And anyone who's familiar with medical stuff does. But Cara Rivera, who promotes MMS in her Genesis 2 church, says that it's a parasite. It doesn't matter that there's no testing to support that. People want a cure. and they're desperate and they believe it. And, it might relieve symptoms, like your kid is in so much pain they stop screaming. But it's hard for me to get into the mindset where I can see why people believe these awful claims when I know what's actually happening, and I can see maybe they're getting some temporary symptom relief. It's hard for me to put the problem in words strong enough to without making them feel like I don't know, without making them feel like they're terrible people, because they're not terrible people. They have good intentions and have just been led really, really astray.
Yeah, in those cases. Now, one thing that you did mention before, like when you were talking about the Crohn's disease, that you went back and read the study. I'm one of those people that I will go and do that too, even though a lot of the science may go over my head. But then after reading medical stuff for so long, I know it. How can the average person decipher those?
I guess if you were to... So I don't necessarily recommend reading primary sources as a layperson. Just for debunking things, I think it's better. For saying that something's bullshit, it's easier. You can pretty easily click through to an article, read the abstract, and see if that matches what the article you've been reading says it means. What I don't love is when people read articles about the potential of curcumin, for example, which is a component of turmeric, and it says that it's advantageous in helping cells renew. Yes, but the conditions are so specific, or this is in vitro, or it's in a mouse, and those aren't necessarily translatable to humans. So I have a lot of trouble with people reading basic science studies or even clinical studies and taking the implications really far, which is how we get really exaggerated science journalism. Science journalists aren't scientists, they're journalists who sometimes write about science. And that's a huge headache for anyone who actually studies science. But it's also good to get the public excited about scientific research. And if we were only ever publishing stories about the next cancer drug that's been approved by FDA or through FDA clinical trials, then you would have an article every 6 months maybe. And that's a lot less exciting than every week we get dozens of stories about kind of little jumps that we're making in the fields. I have a love-hate relationship with that sort of thing.
Well, I think some other things maybe to look for too. I mean, because like I said, first thing I'll do is skim the abstract and then go and see what the abstract says. But then I'll go look at their end result findings to get a little bit more detail, a little bit
in the conclusions,
right? In the conclusions, to get a little bit more detail of what they did, how they came to their conclusions. Some of the things I think are good warning signs too is especially if it's a medical study, if they're using questionnaires as their primary source, that's not very good.
Self-reported studies, non-randomized studies, studies that look at specific outputs but then report results other than what they were originally looking for is a problem too, just because you don't have the statistical power to actually make those conclusions. There are a lot of little details. And I mean, if you can get through a scientific journal article, by all means, you should give it a shot and see what you think. But you're never going to have the same sort of insight as someone directly in the field. Right. And that's the same for me. Like, I specialize really heavily in cancer immunology. Neuro papers are mind-boggling to me. I don't understand them. And I always have to ask friends who study neurobiology to tell me what this means in context. It's still hard for me to explain to people what autism is because it doesn't have the sort of definition that I cling on to really easily, and I have to go back to people who specifically study autism. I mean, I am the first to say that I'm not the expert of all biology.
Right. And I definitely am not either. I'm just kind of your average schmuck that studies everything I can get my hands on.
Absolutely, and that's fantastic. I think that if you can, you should. Just don't overstate your capabilities when you talk to other people about this great new medical technology. that you've read a study about.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you are. I mean, in general.
Well, most of the time, what I'm looking for is like like with your Crohn's disease study, or I have a lot of family and friends that will report the things like aspartame causes all of these diabetes
Everything.
and such, and they'll quote that study that came out in 2014 that they, it was this 10-year study that they did this, and you go and read what they were talking about. You look at the groups that they were studying, and the people that reported problems were already sick when the study started. There were no actual medical exams. It was also, it was all through a questionnaire.
That's never good.
And so by the end of this study, they took all of this data from the questionnaires and people that were already sick, and over the 10 years, they got sicker.
Mm-hmm. Oh, weird. People got older and sicker.
Yeah, and so they and so they turned around and said, well, it was the aspartame that caused this. Mm-hmm. And no, that's not how it works.
No, correlation, causation, and there are so many ways to manipulate the results of a study and report the results incorrectly. For example, you have a study starting with a bunch of old people. You can't apply that to any other age group. You can't apply a group of old white people in Scandinavia to white people in America or Florida. And you can't apply that necessarily to a group of black people. You can't apply it to Pacific Islanders.
Right.
You get really specific. You look for really specific details in basic science, and science journalists are not necessarily trained to recognize those details.
Right. So it looks like we're getting close to needing to wrap this up. So where can people? Well, first of all, what's up for the future for you? What have you got planned as far as your YouTube channel, your Facebook, speaking engagements?
Well, right now I'm preparing for some presentations in school. So my first priority is always my education, since they pay me, and this doesn't. And also that PhD sounds really good. But in the coming months, I'm hoping to start putting out videos again. I'd like to start doing more live streaming, and you can find all of that through my Facebook page, facebook.com/Basic Biology Babe. If you want to get to know me a little bit more personally, you can find me on Twitter. The name is BiolBabe, so BiolBabe. Instagram under the same name. And if you look around my Facebook page, you can find links to my personal profile. You can follow me, comment on non-science related posts I share with my friends and family. And I enjoy the interaction there too.
Okay, and you answered the next question on there too. I was going to ask you about where to find more.
You can find me all over the place, and generally I'm pretty friendly. You can ask me questions if you're not. If you aren't entitled, I'll generally answer questions. Lately, I've had a high school or a college student answering my mail for me because I've just been overwhelmed by it. But wow. If you have an urgent question or concern, you can contact me and she'll let me know.
Okay. I was about to say, you've got somebody on there going, I want to meow.
Always. I get some pretty incessant messages. People... there's a certain subgroup of people on the internet who have poor etiquette. The vast majority are wonderful people.
Yeah, I think the poor etiquette part has to do with the fact that you're behind a keyboard and nobody can see you, and the keyboard acts kind of like a shield that you can just kind of, just run through, and you don't have to worry about what other people think about you. You think.
Absolutely. And people, for some reason, seem really appalled when I point out that I'm an actual person with feelings and other commitments other than this Facebook page. But the vast majority of people are really wonderful. They're understanding. They're patient. And when I forget things, they don't yell at me, which I really appreciate because I get overwhelmed with the amount of requests and also support and number of people who want me to look up studies, for example. When I first started, someone would send me a study and I'd fact check it for them, and now I just don't have time. And people are really understanding about that, which I'm grateful for.
Well, yeah, you do seem like a pretty busy person, and I'm really thankful that you took the time to sit down and talk with me tonight. I do really appreciate that.
No, it was a blast.
Well, I'm going to have to close this off for the evening, and so I want to thank you again for coming out, and I'm going to close this off instead of my usual Bruce's Philosopher song, since I got in trouble on YouTube with the copy.